Beyond Belief Sobriety is a podcast for people who are seeking or who have found a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. Well, hello. Today, my guest is David Greer, and I think this will be an interesting conversation. David learned about this podcast after listening to an episode that I had done with Dr. Ray Baker some time ago. And he perused the website and thought it was somewhat interesting, I guess. So he sent me an email, and so he's here today as my guest. And I'm actually looking forward to this conversation. We talked just a tad bit about something that David does, which is really interesting that he has incorporated with his recovery, and hopefully we'll get to that. But in the meantime, let me say hello to David Greer. David, how you doing? Welcome to Beyond Belief Sobriety.
Thanks so much, John. And it's great to be here. And I'm really excited to have this conversation.
It's one of my favorite things to do. Absolutely. So thank you for being here and giving me the opportunity. Doing this over the course of 5 years, I guess, over 5 years now, and speaking to so many people. I learn more from doing this podcast than probably anything in my recovery. So speaking with you is a bonus for me. I'm going to get something out of it. And if somebody that's listening to the podcast gets something out of it, that's even better. So thank you. What I'd like to do, Dave, is generally I like to start. You don't have to go into a lot of nitty-gritty detail, go as much as you want, but if you could just share a little bit of your recovery journey, and then we'll just kind of let a conversation flow from that. Does that sound all right?
It sounds great.
All right.
So when I take my AA cake, which here in Vancouver, Canada is the tradition of most AA groups, I just start at the beginning, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. So I was born in Edmonton, Canada, and I was relinquished for adoption and adopted into upper middle class, very nice family. My parents both drank and, generally were daily drinkers, like come home from work, have one scotch, right? And that's it. But definitely saw modeled that alcohol was part of our lives, and they certainly would have binges when they had parties and stuff. And my father had taken over the family business from my grandfather. So he's a high-powered, really well-known guy in Edmonton. And just kind of fast forward in middle school, I remember wanting to be so much a part of the crowd that I bought a couple of beers for $1 each. In 1970. So it's like kind of $10 each today.
Yeah.
Right. And, but, wasn't getting drunk in high school. I was an academic jock. So a high-performing athlete, high-performing academic student, certainly part of the football team, keg parties, got very drunk. But, I get drunk at the keg party, and then, and that's Friday night, and Saturday night wouldn't drink during the week. So my story is really the progressive nature of the disease. And I ended up moving out to Vancouver, and I met my wife at university, and alcohol was part of our lives. And, I don't know the exact moment where I went from a cucumber to a pickle. But what I share is that when my wife got pregnant with our first child, I promised her that I would not drink, because she was committed to not drinking with our first child. And that lasted 24 hours. And I don't actually know how I justified or made it okay for me to continue drinking, but somehow I did. And so I know that at that point I was a pickle. And I don't even remember back then how much I was drinking or whether I was a daily drinker, because it's just really just the progressive nature of the disease. And, our second 2 years later, Carolyn's pregnant with our second child, and I don't even think I even tried to agree. I certainly didn't stop drinking. By now, I'm probably a daily drinker. 4 years later, a third, kind of the same. So, at that point, I joined a young software company while I was still in university as a 22-year-old, as the first employee after the founders. And I was busy building this business. And about the time our second child was born, I actually bought out one of the founders, which took a lot of money, a lot of stress. I remember coming out of a accounting meeting, and tears were literally streaming down my eyes, just kind of at the stress and what seemed like the risk. But I did get the business. So then I'm kind of arrived, if you like. So now I'm drinking because, I'm a high-powered entrepreneur. I'm drinking to power up to do more stuff. And I'm, certainly some of the time a workaholic. Although I was decent about taking time off. It's a good thing I love sailing, because I made sure that I did enough time sailing with our kids. And we sailed from the time they were very, very little. And ended up selling out of that business in 2001. And my wife and I did something completely different. We went to the Mediterranean and we commissioned a sailboat, and we homeschooled our kids for 2 years while sailing more than 5,000 miles in the Mediterranean.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, it'd be an interesting story if I stopped drinking, with this big shift. But the Med's a great place to be an alcoholic. And so it continued. But, what I like to share is that on our second overnight passage, so the Med's a lot bigger place than it looks on a map, because in a sailboat, you only travel about 6 miles an hour. So to get very far, you've got to do some long passages. And that includes sometimes going for 24, 36, 48 hours. And our second overnight passage, we were in the Western Mediterranean, and we were in the middle of the sea, 50 or 100 miles from any land, and came on watch at 2 a.m. with my son, Kevin, who at the time was 10. And we stood watches together. And I said, you look after the left side of the boat, I'll look after the right. And just keep a lookout. His eyesight was better than mine anyways. But over above us was the Milky Way. And we kept getting startled because the stars on the horizon were so bright, we thought they were the lights of ships.
Oh, wow.
And I, in hindsight, really think that was a moment that something bigger than me touched me. Like, I really remember that 3-hour watch. I remember sharing it with my son. And I remember some of the other experiences of that trip. So while I was still drinking, I think there was something potentially happening. It's certainly one of my earliest memories of something, much bigger. And it was spectacular. Like, it was just such a spectacular night. I came back from the Med. I was very unfulfilled career-wise, tried to do a bunch of things. And, the drinking just continued, was daily drinker. Most of your listeners probably know the story. And it just kept progressing. At no point, I was still completely in denial. I tried to quit in 2004. My wife didn't think I was an alcoholic. She wasn't all that supportive. And I white knuckled it for 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and then started again. It was, 2-3 days. I was right back to where it was. And then when I turned 50 in 2007, I hired an amazing coach, Kevin Lawrence. And, I think the universe put Kevin in my path so that I could heal. And we worked together for 18 months, and we cleared away all of the other clutter and all the other things until the only thing left was the big elephant in the room, which was my drink.
How about that?
Amazing. And on January 26, 2009, I sent an email to Kevin the night before our coaching meeting at about 10:30 at night, just after having my last beer. I'm a very organized guy, so I organized my last drink. And I said, we have to talk about my drinking. And the next day, he was the first person I ever admitted I had a drinking problem to. And he coached me to go to AA. And he got me to commit. That was a Tuesday. So he got me to commit to go to a meeting by Friday. And because I'm an all in or all out, kind of high performing like I'm all in there when I'm in.
Hmm.
So I had an event downtown that lasted till 8, and I looked up online, and there, lo and behold, there was a meeting at 8:30 that would literally be quarter of a block off my drive home. And so I ended up going to that meeting. And it's actually at a Legion, which is a Legion is for historically it was for the armed services or people that are
Hmm.
retired from the armed services. So it has a bar downstairs. And so I walked into this place, an AA meeting, and the doors are open, and there's like this bar, and there's beers on some of the tables. And I'm standing there like just like a deer in the headlights. And fortunately, a couple of people that were going to the meeting, people in AA have a pretty good sixth sense. They
Yeah.
just looked at me and they said, "Hey, if you're looking for the meeting, go down the hall and go upstairs." So I did. And that was my first meeting. And that's actually been my home group since January. I mean, I didn't make it that night, but a couple of weeks later I did. That was January 27th, 2009. And that's been my home group ever since.
Is there still a bar that you have to walk through with?
Yeah, you have to walk by. Fortunately, you don't have to walk through.
Okay.
Now in COVID, of course, it's been closed for the last several months, but we plan to go
Yeah.
back. We plan to go back. So, and for some of us, like, when you hear the music downstairs, someone's put the jukebox on in the middle of the
Yeah.
meeting, it's kind of like, yeah, this kind of seems appropriate that we got an AA meeting above a bar.
Yeah, that's funny. The home group that I went to prior to my going there, but I think it was back in the 60s and 70s, they met above a jazz bar here in Kansas City, and they always spoke fondly about their meetings above the bar, like you say, hearing the music and all of that. But it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
So you mentioned the coach. Was he a life coach?
he's a business coach.
A business coach. Okay. So this is where now just for the listeners to know, David already clued me in on the fact that he is interested in business coaching and that he incorporates that as part of the recovery. And now it makes sense because it was your business coach who got you into recovery.
And in fact, it's why I decided to become a business coach. Was I
Isn't
wanted
that
to I wanted to give the gift to other entrepreneurs and business owners and CEOs that Kevin had given to me. And
you
and he gave
know,
me a lot of gifts beyond recovery,
oh
but
sure,
but
sure.
that was definitely a driving motivation for me to become a business coach was what Kevin had given to me over a
Yeah.
very long relationship that we had together.
There is a real connection. I work as a manager and I'm a person in recovery and I've recently gotten a certification as a peer support specialist here in Missouri, and I learned a lot about um, motivating people to reach goals, their
Mhm.
recovery goals. You let the person define what their recovery will be to them, and then you work with them to help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And when I was taking this course, I thought to myself, well, this applies to my employees at work.
Absolutely.
you know this is recovery is this is very much like what I would do as a manager at work is if you're a good manager is to find out what motivates your people. So I can understand how as a business coach and especially as a person in recovery and with your background that you would want to incorporate the two. Can you tell me a little bit about how that would work, how you would envision that working, or how is it working?
So, I'm still. I only made this commitment about 6 months ago, and I'm still feeling my way forward. Although a client I took on last year was drinking for the first 3 months that we worked together, and then he came out and admitted he had a problem, and so here's how I see it working right now is people hire me because I'm a business coach and I have a lot of
Right.
business expertise, right? But drinking clearly gets in the way.
Sure.
So like for this individual, who's someone I actually have known personally for a long time, I said, if you want me to be like your temporary sponsor and work with you on that, then we need to pause the professional coaching.
Mm,
And then
okay.
because I feel like that's 12-step work and I
Yeah.
shouldn't be charging for it, right?
Right.
And I said, or, we continue with our relationship as a professional coach. I'll share my experience, strength, and hope. Like it does show up in our coaching calls.
Sure.
it's just, I try and say, after 10 minutes, it's like, do you want to stay on this path, or have you got some business issues you want to deal with too?
Mm-hmm.
And then I insisted that he go out and find a sponsor to work with
Mm-hmm.
in recovery, which he did find one that worked for him,
Mm-hmm.
and has worked with that person every week for the last year, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of feeling my way. If it's pure recovery 12-step work, then again, I don't see that I can charge for that against the
Yeah.
principles of
Mm-hmm.
AA. But my goal is always to help someone,
Yeah.
someone into recovery,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
For this particular client, this focusing on the business aspect and where he wants to go professionally, while still understanding his journey and what's been going on for him for the last year
Mm-hmm.
in early recovery, has been very, very powerful.
I can imagine. I really like that connection. And I've talked to other people who are recovery coaches, and there's no way you can talk about recovery without talking about someone's entire life,
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
don't know if there's any way that you can really help somebody reach their goals in anything if you don't kind of deal with who they are as a person and what they're going through as an individual. So it makes sense to me, and I think it's a valuable service to have someone in recovery who is in this role, so that at least you're attuned to it. You're attuned to if you're with somebody, say, oh, you know what, I'm picking up on that. You might have you might have something else you want to talk about as well,
Right. Or
with
not, or it's
or
like
not.
with Coach Kevin, like, it took 18 months for us to build a trust relationship till I got to the point where I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Mm-hmm.
And now I had someone in my corner who I could
Mm-hmm.
fully trust, and know that he's going to do the right thing for me. I
Yeah.
also knew that when I admitted it to Kevin, because I built a strong enough relationship with him, I knew he'd never, ever, ever let me off the hook.
Ah.
Like, I
You got
knew
some accountability.
that was a one-way street,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I knew, if I wanted to keep drinking, he wouldn't like stand in the way, but he'd keep calling me on it. And if I didn't get towards my goals, like, I knew that that's where he'd go.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I sent him that email, I knew that was really it. I didn't know I was going to get to AA,
Right.
right? But I knew the jig was up,
Mm-hmm.
and probably the first time ever that I was not in denial.
Yeah. Yeah. That takes a lot.
Yeah,
So that's
that's it. And the fact that Kevin was able to engender that relationship with me and get me to that point is just, I think, is a remarkable testament to his coaching abilities,
yeah.
and to his abilities as a human being.
Yeah, yeah, that really is quite a skill. This recovery coaching thing is just kind of taken off, I guess, over the last 5, 6 years. I don't know. I've seen it around, and I kind of scratch my head wondering what are these people doing. But there is, I mean, it's interesting that you could be a person in recovery. I've been in recovery for a long time, but I might not necessarily be very good at helping somebody, identify and reach their recovery goals. There's more to it than just being there yourself.
Hmm.
So when you have someone that comes to you for coaching, what's kind of the first, what do? You just kind of sit down and get a feel for what they want?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not about me. Like,
Right.
coaching is not. There's nothing about me in it, other than the skills, and I got a big toolkit. I got a
Right.
really big toolkit, right?
Right.
Probably a lot of stuff you've never heard of. So,
Right.
right. So I bring that to the table, but really the process is talking, seeing if the person is coachable. I often
Yeah.
do like a
Oh,
free 1 hour call. I got to tell you, because a lot of my clients are all entrepreneurs, business owners,
right.
CEOs, or super, super high powered salespeople, or
Uh-huh.
right, uber high performers. So a lot of those people are not coachable.
Really?
Like, they're just, they have problems and they want to get them fixed, but they don't want to look at themselves in the mirror. That's for
Right.
sure. Right.
That's funny.
So sometimes I'll have an hour, like, introductory call with someone, and I'll just say, "Oh, that's very interesting," and maybe they made a commitment to do something, and I'll say, "And I'll follow up with you to make sure you did ABC,"
Right.
and that's it. right?
And that's the same thing you're going to have with somebody if you're a recovery coach and someone comes to you. You're going to have some people that they're really not ready. They're not interested in recovery.
Yeah,
They told me that during our the training that I went on is, if you can't set the goal for these people. So if their goal isn't abstinence, then they're not there. That's not you have to meet them where they are,
yeah.
and you can only help them get to where they want to go, and whether that be in recovery or anything else in life.
And then, after, so assuming that I think our personalities get along and our energy levels,
Hmm.
um, oftentimes say at the end of that introductory call, I think we could work well together. What do you think?
Oh,
Again, like,
yes.
it's you got to co-create
Right.
this relationship, is my belief.
Right.
And then the process looks just like what you described. So I send them an intake form, so I get some information, their spouse and their kids. So if they start talking about them, I know who they are and
Yeah.
roughly how old they are, because it will come up in conversation. It's interesting. Most business people say, "We're only going to talk about business, right?" And I say, "Yep." I say, "We're only going to talk about the things that you want to talk about."
Hmm.
And then,
So,
of course, sometime within 3 months, we'll be talking about some other aspect of their life. Um, but I understand to begin with, they have trepidation about opening up about
yeah.
that. That's building trust too. But then I asked them to write down like 6, 12, and 18 months goals,
Hmm.
and if they can, I asked them to consider 3 areas of their life, so their career slash business,
Hmm.
um, their self. Like, so what is one goal you want to do for 6 months that's just for you?
Hmm.
Like, you know, whatever that looks like. I've had people say, well, I've always wanted to go to the Masters. Okay, well,
Hmm.
when's the Masters? Like, is that in 6, 12, or 18 months?
Hmm.
And that's just for you, right? It's like, I'm not going with your spouse, not just something you really want to do for yourself. And then, what's a goal for your life, which I mean by your significant others, your relationships, like the other aspect that's not business and not just yourself. And my experience with high performing people is we often, very, very often, squeeze ourselves out of the middle. We're super passionate about our business, our career,
Yeah.
what it is we work on. We're super passionate about our families, about the relationships that we have, and we just get so intense on those two sides that we literally don't put enough time and energy into making sure that we replenish ourselves and we do those things that really sustain us. Um,
So this is
so
really
that
interesting
so
because
that's what I
actually,
ask. Not sometimes people just will give me one goal for 6 months and one for 12 and one for 18. Like, and again, there's no right or wrong. Sometimes
yeah,
we have to have another call where I help them a little bit. Oh, I have no idea what my goals are.
right.
And so I just, again, try and be curious, ask a few things. Well, what about this for your business? What about that for your life? And just get them to nudge a little bit and then write something down.
So recently, I've had people like you come around in my life that are kind of putting some ideas in my head. So I've been going through some stuff where with this podcast, the podcast has gotten really popular. I've been having a lot of guests, and I let them schedule their time at their convenience. And next thing I know, I have more guests than podcasts I can actually publish. I have more going on, and the stress that comes from that makes me feel overwhelmed. So I was talking actually to a therapist about this problem, and she suggested the very thing that you do. She says, look at your day. You've got 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
You have to work 8 hours. You have to sleep 8 hours, if you want to. So that gives you another 8 hours left. And then you have to divide that time up. You have to think about, your own personal wellness. You need to think about, you need to budget some time for your family. You need to budget some time for exercise. You need to budget your time for, and then what's left over, you can commit to your passion and your projects. And it's just, and she's told me the same thing that you just mentioned, that people who are really passionate about something, they take that 8 hours where they're not sleeping or working, and they act like it's there to give out to everybody,
Hmm.
like it's an unlimited amount of unlimited resource, and it's really limited, and they kind of leave out a lot of other parts.
Yeah, and because we love helping other people, because I'm sure you love the impact you make with your
Oh,
podcast. I mean,
yeah.
and how fantastic. Like, it's not that they're bad
No.
per se. Like, again, I don't judge these things. It's
Right.
just, if you are so depleted, you can't do anything in life, which is where you eventually end up,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
If you do this long enough. Uh, so you have to bring conscious choice. I guess the number one thing I ask of clients is that you bring conscious choice. Like, it doesn't really matter to me what you choose, as long as you thought about it and then you made a choice. It's the
Okay.
unconscious, the, oh, I just,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
Like, anyone can schedule my time and there'll be more podcasts, and boom,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like, right? Which, when you started, was probably a conscious choice and it made a lot of sense to you, but you need to make a different conscious choice where stage status where you are now, because you're in a different place.
And the same thing with our recovery. We have to make, in step 3 in AA, which I see as a decision, it's really a thoughtful, it's a commitment is what it is. And it's one that's well thought out based upon what we've learned from that moment when we said we can't handle this by ourselves, and we have hope that there's some so we have hope for ourselves. Then it comes time to make a decision and a commitment. And I kind of see that as what you're talking about, where it's like, you're not just like back, you're not just saying, you're not just reacting like, I got a DWI and that's it, I'm done, and I've done that too many times. I'm not really making a conscious, you know, um,
Mhm.
decision. There's a difference, and I don't know, if you can even manufacture that or not, for somebody in recovery.
Um, so I guess, so my experience in coaching, in general, is it's asking someone to slow down.
Mm,
So one of my kind of taglines is slow down to speed up, which is, I use in a business context to say you really need to do strategic planning by getting out of the office. And I have a structure and a suggestion for how often that is, which is usually way more than most entrepreneurs think they should.
mm.
But I've seen it over and over again. What a difference it makes is this: you need to pull back, slow down, look at the bigger picture, then you can accelerate back into what you want. To me, step 3 is a slowdown. Like, you need to slow yourself down to really say and make that decision.
That's a good way of looking at it. I never really thought about it that way, but it is because you're kind of, first of all, you're kind of alcohol itself kind of slaps you in the face, and your life is usually kind of a mess. And so, yeah, you are kind of slowing down, aren't you? That's a time where of almost reflection. It's like, wow, something has to give here.
Well, and so I can just go back to, we talked about what it was like for me, but then what happened was, I started going to AA meetings, right? I talked about what happened and then what it's like, you know, in that early recovery, just going and sitting in an AA meeting for 60 minutes, like that is slowing down,
It is, isn't it?
right? Like, it's, you got to put your butt in a chair and you just got to pay attention
You listen,
and you listen. You don't talk, like,
right?
right? I do a lot
Yeah.
of coaching around that as well. Like, maybe you want to try listening some more.
And
And
that's really
and
helpful, and I didn't realize at the time that, see, there was something good about going to those AA meetings that I found really, really helpful, because I had here was my thing. I had all these problems that I created from my drinking, and that could have landed me in jail. I didn't have a place to live and all this kind of stuff. And all I could think about was getting out of these problems and worrying about these problems. And the more I worried and thought about these problems, the more I just wanted to drink so I didn't have to even think about this kind of crap. But when I was at an AA meeting, I never thought about that stuff. I never thought about those other things. And I think that's why early on, like my first 30, 60 days or so, I went to a lot of AA meetings, because that was my way, I guess, of kind of slowing down, stepping back, listening,
mhm.
letting the garbage kind of, you know, not infiltrate mine. I would have drank if it wasn't for AA, because I just needed to turn my mind off.
Yes, Yes, and just to see a different way of living. The other thing that was really massively impactful for me was about my second or third week of sobriety. I heard about a private men's step group,
Oh,
and I went there, and you know, we, the way that particular group, we read one of the chapters from the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions,
okay.
either step or tradition, and we just kind of work through it in order. Um, and then every single person in the room shares, and every meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a lot of people, then everybody learns to adjust their share to be shorter. And the kind of format is share on something that came up during the reading
Mm-hmm.
related to whatever was in the reading, and then share on what's happening in your life. And again, to hold space for a group of men and be perfectly silent and just go around the room was a very powerful model for me to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then this particular group of men were very really share emotionally, and again, to witness that was really, really impactful to me. I remember the first time that someone shared and cried, and I was so uncomfortable. I so wanted to go over to that person and say it's okay, and kind of parent them or whatever it was. Like, it wasn't their discomfort; it was my discomfort with
Yeah.
another person crying, and my discomfort was crying myself, it turns
Mm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I got to watch, like, I don't know how many, there's probably 15 people at that meeting, and
Mm-hmm.
14 of them just sat there and didn't say a word, didn't just honored the experience that that individual was having. And that particular meeting has been such a gift to me, to just see that over and over. And in fact, the same group I still meet with, 12 and a half years later, I still meet with them. I mean, some of the men have come and gone,
Mm-hmm.
and right, like all, but there's a core group that they were there the first night I went in.
I
And
always thought that was one of the greatest strengths of AA is that the fact that you're listened to, that nobody is there to fix you. No one's going to
mm,
stop and interrupt you, or usually they shouldn't anyway. You get to be listened to, and there's a lot of value in that, because by talking, I can, I see people's faces in the room, and I feel like people care about me. They're in my corner. I feel safe, and I'm kind of talking through stuff, and it was quite helpful. It's different than like going to like a group therapy thing where, there's a doctor who's actually going to guide me through it. And that's good too. But I think
mhm,
there's a tremendous value in that listening, and not just for the person, but like you mentioned, for yourself, because you're uncomfortable the guy's crying and you think you need to go over there and fix that. You need to go over there and do something for this guy, right?
yep.
But the thing to do is just to be there, just to sit there, you know? And I had the same experience. I went to a men's group for like 25 years, all men's group, and it was an interesting group. We had meetings like what you described, where we would read the 12 and 12. We had a lot of those meetings. We'd read the 12 and 12 and go around and discuss them. And that that was a that was good experience for me in some ways, because I grew up in a military family with a father who was very authoritarian, and I grew up in that era where men behaved in a certain way, and getting into AA at the time of my life, I was just like raw, I guess. My emotionally, I was just kind of just beaten down, and it was important for me, I guess, or helpful for me to be around other men who had some compassion and understanding and could speak about their own pain and not just order me to be something different.
Yeah.
Or you shouldn't be talking like that. You shouldn't be expressing that emotion or whatever. Which is how I grew up.
Yeah. And I've eventually learned in recovery and some therapy work and some other 12-step group work that I had a narcissist father, and one of the things that wasn't allowed was negative emotions,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And and so it's not surprising that it was modeled. And
Mhm.
And roughly 9 or 10 years into sobriety, after firmly having kept the door locked on my birth family. So I mentioned I was adopted at birth.
Yes. Yes.
Um, I had done enough healing in AA and through all of this work that I decided to go find my birth families, which I did. So I found my birth mother and my birth father. And my birth father or my birth mother doesn't want to have anything to do with me, but thankfully both of her daughters, my sisters, um, do. And I've built great friendships with them. And through them, I've learned that, my birth mother was an alcoholic, and that our brother, so between them, my two sisters was a brother, and he died in 2015 of liver disease as a direct result of his alcoholism. So, I've now seen a path from potentially, a genetically related. Certainly, it wasn't that common in my adoptive family, but in my birth family. And my birth father wonders if his father wasn't maybe. He moved out when he was 18, so he wasn't around the house. But he thinks certainly later on, his father might have been an alcoholic, and his sister is an alcoholic who's in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like I may have got it from both sides. But that's been another really interesting part of my healing and journey, which there's no way I could have got there without sobriety and without the AA and without all of these experiences of these meetings and of this sharing and hearing other people go find their birth families.
Yeah. I
And
have a friend who I've had on this podcast, David B. Bull, and he has written a book called Parallel Universes, which is all about his experience as an adoptee. And the first time I ever heard the term being relinquished was from him.
Mhm.
He referred to it as that. And I've had a couple of conversations with him about what he's learned about adoptees and the high rate of addiction problems in
Mhm.
adoptees.
Yes.
It was really, really interesting to learn from him, and he did the same thing as you. He did go out and seek out his birth family as well. He had what the thing I remember about him the most is he had a great experience with his adopted family. They were very loving. He had a good home and everything, and they went out of their way to let him know how special he was for having been adopted. Okay, that we
Mhm.
chose you. You're special. Well, when he was like 5 years old, he was walking home with his friends from school, and he told them that he was adopted, and they looked at him as if there was something wrong with him. And he didn't understand because he was always told it was a good
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And then from that point forward, he couldn't ever trust what his parents were telling him.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I found that really, really interesting that one event, from that changed the way he thought about his adoption and just about his whole world. It was like, if I could be, and at a young age, if I could be deluded about this thing, what else is
Right.
there?
Yeah. So my experience, I mean, mom and dad are mom and dad. I mean, my
Yeah.
father's passed away. Still love me. My mom's 93. Got COVID last year and survived it.
Oh, wow.
I know, amazing. Um, but what really came up for me was really the codependency. I was too nervous about my mother being disappointed in me, or um, whatever her story was around my going and finding my birth parents.
Mhm.
And at times she's supportive, and at times she doesn't really want to hear about it. So,
Right.
and my mom's someone who I've basically been able to share almost anything with. So that's sometimes hard, but that's also, my growth is that's her issue, and she's not comfortable with it. I don't need to push it on her.
Right.
Right. And I have so many other people in my corner now that can support me.
Right.
That
Yeah.
I right, I can get lots of support. In fact, I participate in a once a month. It's called the Forget Me Not Society. It's just a group support of birth moms
Oh,
and adoptees. I
interesting.
shouldn't say birth moms. Any birth dads
Right.
would be equally welcome. They just don't
Okay.
come. Adoptive parents would be equally welcome. Again, they just generally don't come. And again, it's kind of like AA. It's just we share every month, and we share about what's going on for us, where we are in our journey, what kind of happened, whether we've been disappointed or connected, or and And for me, also hearing the experiences of the birth moms from their point of view has been very powerful. And
It's
like
easy.
to
It's easier
understand it
now,
from the
isn't
other
it, to
side.
find it's easier now for an adoptee to find their birth parents than it was in the past, isn't it?
Yes, generally it
Yeah,
is. Yes.
yeah. It used to
So,
be that they just would never show. They would never
right.
disclose to a person, but now they do, and a lot through a lot of DNA testing and whatever.
So,
But yeah,
so that's another, yeah. So I got it because the adoption records were opened by Alberta, where I was born in 2004. So when I applied in 2016 or 17, I was given my file, but my birth mother had put a veto on sharing any of her personal information, so it was all
okay.
redacted.
Oh, okay.
But there were enough clues, and you know, I'm
Mhm.
I'm very tenacious, so
Yeah. Well,
I was able to, and with some help, I actually hired a person in Edmonton who's helped 3,500 birth parents and adoptees
yeah.
connect over the last 40 years. And so he just looks at my birth record and says, "Oh, that's Doctor So and So, and he worked with this home for unwed moms." Like, just so you think there's no information there, but it turns out for someone who really knows, there's clues, and
Yeah.
we were able to sleuth it. And then I hired researchers at the Calgary Public Library, and they found the record of looking for my grandfather because he was the anesthetist in
Mhm.
Calgary, and there weren't that many anesthetists in 1957, and so they were able to find out who my birth father was.
Oh,
So, and imagine that, like, me asking for help. That's also a pretty
right.
radical. That's a pretty radical thought, and an
Oh,
even more
boy.
radical action.
And still to this day, it can be difficult for me, but when you do, boy, it sure does make a difference. Well, I
It
think it's
does.
really I really find this interesting, and I've been thinking about this whole thing about coaching, business and recovery and how the 2 kinda go together for a while now, and so it's really it's fortuitous that I've had this opportunity to talk to you about this very topic about the two how the two are intertwined. And even when they wrote the big book, they came up with that chapter to the employers. It was written by Hank Parkhurst, and even then it was kind of talking about how our work life is another part of our lives. And in that particular chapter there he was just trying to tell employers, don't fire these guys because they're drunks. Give them a chance, they might just be really great workers later on.
Right. And yes, and don't judge them too harshly,
Right.
and that's not changed. Like, I've done
Mm,
probably 30 or 40 interviews, and it's still amazing how much it's a moral issue rather than a mental health issue,
yeah, yeah,
right?
there's we still have a ways to go to break
We,
down that
we
stigma.
do, we do. It
We really
is
do. And it exists more with alcohol than it does with anything else. And I guess it's because we it's alcohol is so much a part of our culture where people drink it in movies. It's just like, people seem to be okay drinking it without a problem, when in fact it's a very addictive substance, and it's not really good for human beings to ingest anyway. Anyway,
well, and in high-powered business situations, alcohol is what often greases the wheels. That's how you close really big deals. It's you know you
it
take the
is.
client out to business, like, it's so normalized. And I pointed out to some entrepreneurs that I coach. They said, "Is this like heavy drinking?" And I'm like, "Well, you had 2 drinks before dinner, and you had a bottle of wine each. Yep, that's more than 5 drinks. That's heavy drinking."
Yeah, I've actually seen that where I work. There was one instance, and I didn't. I've been sober for a long time. There was one instance when I was really uncomfortable being around in a work situation with people drinking. And what it was, I was out of town. I was in the Chicago area, and I was at this like a cocktail party where people are mingling and doing the small talk, which is always difficult for me anyway. And they had a bar, and they give you little tickets for drinks. And of course, I'm not going to drink anything but maybe a Coke or whatever. And this one guy who knew I didn't drink was just pestering me for my ticket, so I gave him my tickets. And and he was kind of making fun of me for not being a drinker and all that kind of stuff. I was just so uncomfortable, so I left. I left that little thing, and I went down into the lobby, and I called my sponsor, and we just chatted about something. But when I went back up there, I realized that I left my coat at a table, and I ended up sitting down right next to like the CFO of the company. and I had the best time I've ever had because she was so laid back and she was so nice, and everybody in the table, they were sober and they were cool. They were great to talk to, and I just ended up having a really good time. But I really needed to remove myself from that uncomfortable situation where we're mingling and doing a small talk and drinking and all that kind of crap. But that was the one time I was really uncomfortable, and I just had to remove myself from the situation. But for the most part, um, in my position, I don't really have to be. I don't not being an entrepreneur or anything, and working for a company that really tries to save their money. We don't do a lot of that anyway.
Not a lot of that kind of entertainment.
Yeah. But thank you for coming on. This was really interesting. I enjoyed the conversation. I think this turned out to be a great episode. It's super, and it'd be interesting to hear from you later on to see, how this thing moves for you. If you're gonna find, it'd be interesting to see if you actually kind of market yourself in that way. Do you think you would, or
Yeah, that's
like?
my plan. I'm currently like building my platform. Like I want to come up with a 1 hour talk and figuring out what I want to change on my website. And I'm not quite there yet, but and I've done a few videos which I have put out there and kind of got feedback from people, and broken my anonymity, which is still quite uncomfortable for me.
I started doing that now.
But I think it's the right thing to do.
It is for me.
I really think it's the right thing to do to be able to help more people.
I think so too. What's your website?
CoachDJGreer.com. So it's my initials, David James.
Okay. Well, we'll put that up in the show notes when we post this. Again, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. And with that, I will say that's another episode of Beyond Belief Sobriety. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to help out our podcast, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can do it money-wise by going over to our website, beyondbeliefsobriety.com, and clicking on the donate button or the little yellow coffee cup at the bottom to buy a cup of coffee. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/beyondbeliefsobriety, or you can become a member of our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of stuff posted on YouTube that we don't post on the podcast. So going over there, you might find something over there that's interesting. And then later on, down the road, there might be other ways to help, just volunteering to help out with the podcast. We'll see what will come of that in the future. David, thanks again. I really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to hearing how your business develops going forward.
Super. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.